I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting for Monday, January 9th, 2017. And our first order of business is to approve the minutes of December 5th. Does anyone have
I
any
move
comment?
to approve the minutes.
Okay.
I will second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Okay.
Who moved?
Kathy
Kate.
moved it. I seconded.
Yeah, I moved it.
And who seconded?
Kate.
And it was unanimous.
We didn't bring them.
We're sharing. Okay, so, no announcements and no public. I don't know if everyone knows Brian Bannon, the zoning administrator. He's serving as public this evening. First, I would just like to introduce the two new planning commissioners. We have Jessica Gilbert and Sean Tao. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for your service. And tonight is a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the Development Review Board. And I'm very happy to welcome the Development Review Board here.
Thank you.
And we can introduce ourselves first and then open it up for discussion. So I'm Liz McLaughlin and I'm the chair of the Planning Commission.
I'm Jessica Gelter. I'm new to the Planning Commission.
I'm Kate Audlin. I'm a member of the Planning Commission.
Me now, or I'm James Valente, I'm the chair of the DRB.
Maya Hasagawa, DRB.
George Reed Savory, DRB.
Brian Bannon, zoning administrator and DRB clerk.
Sue Fillion, planner.
Rob Francis, planning director.
Sean Tao, a planning commissioner.
Casey Berg, Planning Commission.
Kathy Erkler, Planning Commission.
Right. So our purpose this evening is to go over any issues that the DRB may have found in the actual working and administrating of the zoning regulations. So the planning staff has issued certain items that would really prompt discussion. They had any comments. So why don't I start with you, James, and see what comments and discussion we can begin.
Do you want to go through the list, or do you want to hear our non-list-based ideas?
I'd rather hear your non-list-based items first.
They're not very good, at least mine aren't. So, I brought one thing to this meeting, which is kind of silly, and I almost didn't want to bring it up, but it is painful to me the way that the sign ordinances are written and how it is exclusively based on size, and there's no qualitative measurement. A good example of this, and kind of an example of why I'm not terribly confident about it, is the lamplighter sign, which I think is now chopped up in some junkyard. I didn't see it last time I drove by. Is that right? Is it gone for good?
Yeah, it's fine.
Well, it's too late for that, I guess, but there are old signs like that. You know, the Latches Marquee is a good example of one that sort of fortunately has this ridiculous little exception in the zoning bylaws, which is clearly just meant to allow them to have that marquee, that I think preserve important design elements from the history of our town. And if you're limiting the size of the sign, it seems to me to be somewhat it puts pressure on the builder of that sign to make the sign as noticeable in that small space as possible. And it seems to me that we get rectangular signs in bright colors that are not modern and not traditional and have no character, and just, I don't know, I think they're horrible. I think like every single sign on Putney Road in the last 20 years is horrible. And but the thing is, if they're within the size dimensions, it's like, well, there's not much we can do about it, even if they're horrible, because it is such a mathematical procedure that the DRB has to engage in.
Well, otherwise, it would be some sort of aesthetic controls?
And that's the problem, because I don't know how you could craft a law where we could say, okay, well, this looks good, so this one's okay, and that looks bad, so that's okay. You know, I was thinking about conforming with the character of the neighborhood, and I was curious how Bellows Falls managed to sneak that gigantic sign on the side of the building by the exit.
I think there was a to-do about that.
There was
I know there was a
a
to-do about that, I
It
suspected.
used to have a to Bellows Falls, 5 miles, and
Right.
that had to come off. I mean, they had issues.
Yep.
Because otherwise it was a billboard
Yep.
as opposed to art.
So, I don't have an answer on
And
this. This is just something
maybe
that frustrates.
Historic preservation element to keep things like the latches and older things in place.
Well, even when we talk about just size, remember the struggles we had with that Black Mountain Inn sign? And they're required to reduce.
At least 2 people here are going to have no idea what you're
Oh.
talking about. Though.
Black Mountain Inn on Putney Road used to be part of a chain, America's Best or something. And they had, they were told that they were dropped by their franchisee, whatever, franchisor, and they were told they had to take that America's Best sign down. So they came to us and they used to have 3 signs on that post. And because they had to reduce the total square footage, they ended up just leaving off the bottom sign. And it looks rather silly, if you ask me now.
Panda North sign's another good example.
What?
Panda North sign's another good example.
Panda North, though, we had a court order.
I think
So there wasn't much
there was a
we could
long
do.
history of litigation with the Black Mountain Inn sign, as
Yes.
well as I recall.
Yes.
But their court order was different than Panda North's.
That's true. I mean, I don't have a proposed solution. I've
You
been
don't have an
thinking
answer,
about-
you just have a,
I wish there was some type of exception where it was possible for us to have some subjective review of the sign. But the problem is that's going to open up more or less anything and render the sign ordinance, I think, kind of a nullity. Because you're basically giving the DRB free rein to be like, yeah, well, okay, that looks good, so you can have a 100 by 60 foot sign, like a Las Vegas sign. I mean, I suppose you could have an exception that would increase the limits a certain percentage or something like that. But still, it's so hard to have standards for something that's good looking and not good looking. And I don't think it's really even legal to do that anymore because of the Jam Golf decision.
Not Jam Golf,
Jam.
actually the Gilbert, the
Yeah.
one that's in that.
Right.
That mostly has to do with temporary commercial signs, but it's,
Reed versus Gilbert. Thanks
Yeah.
to Thomas. Clarence Thomas finally spoke, and that was his decision.
But it's frustrating because, like, if you look at the original sign for the Black Mountain Inn from 50 years ago that was huge, it has kind of a nice look to it. And it's like the sign ordinances, it forces people to use these large structures that are cost like tens and tens of thousands of dollars and put smaller and smaller signs on them. And it's just sort of,
but
I don't know.
why don't we
do you
take
really
your
think
question and,
the regulations I mean, NECA just put up a new sign. It's interesting.
I like that sign. Yeah, that's a
I
cool
like it
sign.
too. I mean, there's some nice signage downtown that all fall within the regulations. I think some of it is what
What
the
if-
owner is choosing.
That's true.
What if we even just had a page of saying, without necessarily changing the regulations, or you could look into what we can do, but like, we like these signs, X, Y, and Z, and we don't like these signs, A, B, and C, would that be
We
helpful?
could probably do a handout of something about good sign design or
Yeah.
something, so that when an
Right.
applicant comes in, we could
We could guide them,
guide them to think about.
but we can't compel.
Right.
Right.
Well, Vermont does that non-compel thing pretty well.
I mean, part of the thing is some signs don't really work. Like, take the laundromat sign on Elliott Street, the old laundromat there.
Yep.
Really cool sign. I think it's probably 10 by 2.
Yes.
Um,
Maybe a bit taller. Yeah.
and formerly neon lit. And I think it's one of the prettiest things in town, and I don't think it could be in any district at this moment.
You have any thoughts, Brian?
I think you're right. I think it's one of my favorite signs in town as well.
Or the Mr. Liverpill thing that was restored on
yeah,
the
that's
building
nice.
on Elliott Street.
Which,
I mean, it's frustrating because it's like the
It's
Potter
a-
Stewart thing on pornography or obscenity.
know when you see it, yeah.
Like, oh yeah, that's a nice sign. We should let that one go.
Somebody's rather those liver pills
Um,
on the wall. Sure.
No,
you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
I know the one.
With an existing
Yeah.
sign, when does it trigger to?
when you needed a review to change it.
Because I
What was
forget
the
to
question?
What
The question was
constitutes,
what constitutes triggering an existing sign to need a review to bring into compliance? I know we went back and forth in that language.
Isn't
I think changing it,
it just changing the sign?
changing the sign, changing.
Right. I don't.
So I did.
You know, Brian.
it's developer driven. If the developer wants to change the sign,
Yeah,
the
I mean, if
developer
you-
will suggest
You
a
know, the
sign.
issue there, if you wanted to keep the old laundromat sign and
Make it say
Operate.
something different.
operate a restaurant inside, you could do it, but it's not going to relate. It's not going to relate to the new use. So if you want to go ahead and change the sign, then you're going to have to conform with the current regulations.
So I did come up with an idea that I don't think is probably feasible for a number of reasons, but it is an idea. To have a classification for a sign that qualifies as art by virtue of its intrinsic niceness, and have that art committee that was kind of not really functional, I think, on the something. What was it? The request for proposals for the old building down by the river. I mean, I know there's like 3 art committees out there,
Yeah.
and between the 3 of them,
Well, it's kind of art and historic preservation, right? The one that Mary's on?
Yep. You mean
Well-
the design review committee? Yes.
That one.
Yes. So if it was in, so
if they could be like, yes, this is art, then perhaps it could qualify for an exception as an art sign, animal entirely of my own invention.
But that's not gonna,
Yeah.
you're not
It's
imposing
too
that on
subjective,
any
I think.
possible sign that needs to be built. Like, why would anyone bother to do that?
Because you'd be allowed to have a bigger, more attractive sign that would draw people to your business,
So
sort
if
of-
they wanted to go outside of the bounds of the zoning as it's listed, they could get approval by going through the art committee to have it defined as like art or to have some aesthetic.
That's the idea, and I'm aware that this is like
That's
the
tricky
least
business.
artistic way to make
Yeah.
art of all time, but.
yeah.
But it's also
so-
one more thing that somebody has to do. Well, I mean, I guess if they want a bigger sign, it would be worth
It's
it.
not a good idea.
Still think-
I mean, it's not a good idea. I know it's not. I couldn't come up with another way to do it, and that
Yeah,
was,
I don't think that's a good one.
okay.
And you don't have any, like, you don't know of other examples of language that would define an aesthetic where it would,
The sign.
I think they struggled.
The sign
struggle
thing is
with
getting
it.
harder and harder as time goes by around the issue of the free speech.
Right.
And so controlling sign content is becoming harder and harder. That's the import of the Gilbert decision that we cite here in the handout. And if I'm hearing James properly, I could imagine that if we were to hire somebody with some expertise and some background in historic signs, you could go around and classify or catalog old signs that we have in town and say, if you want to preserve that sign, then that's great. And, you know, it's fine just the way it is as long as it's maintained and it's functional. So if it's a neon light, it works.
Well, can't they do that anyway? Can't they keep their sign if they have it?
But then you could offer them something in return, say that they could have a sign of similar design that actually advertised the existing business or something. So there's a way around it where you'd actually encourage them to preserve the old sign and then use a similar format for a new sign. But I think that it's sort of almost like a historic district or something, that you're really talking about a very tightly defined area. And once you get up onto Putney Road, I know that the old sign for America's Best was, you know, not unattractive in a way, but I think in the end, they want the biggest sign possible that's internally lit so that people know where the hotel is and that it's got a spa, you know, a hot tub or something, you know, critical things for the decision maker. So I think unless you can tie it to a historic district or somewhere where we would be operating design controls in the first instance, like the downtown. You're really pushing it. And yeah.
We should probably look into it when we're working on the downtown master plan.
Yep, that's not a bad idea.
Could you? Or
And I
move
get
to
it.
Nashville.
You know, if you're going to use something like neon and sort of have some script-like thing, it gets very difficult if we're going to just draw a box around it and say it can only be 10 by 3 or something. If they want to have something in script right across the front of the
Squiggly
store,
and- yeah.
maybe we look at that and find an alternate method of measurement so that it would encourage things that were not rectilinear and boring.
Creativity.
Yeah, but I don't think you can go much further than that.
So is there some possibility where the DRB has authority to like incentivize?
No,
Signs?
no, not with signs. It would have to be something that's spelled out in the land use regulations.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have to take your comment and
Yep.
run with it a little bit and see what we
Yep.
come up with.
Yeah.
Dare to dream.
I mean, the thing about the idea is I think Main Street looks pretty good. It's like
Yes.
Putney Road is what really needs cool signs. Putney Road is
And,
Right,
and
and I-
cool signs will say Putney Road.
Well, you know, I mean, no one lives there. Like, if you wanted to put a cool neon sign there, it wouldn't really bother anybody, and it would look a heck of a lot better than what they've got there now.
Right.
And we could make them turn it off at 10:30 or something.
I thought you were going to say 7:30, which is more likely when you turn it off, but that's okay.
Well, whenever the lights go blinking, the signs have to
7:30.
go.
No.
The signs have to go off.
Okay. You could have them blink with the lights. That'd be cool. Yeah. Okay. So
Any
let's do some research. We'll
Yeah.
get back to James.
Thank you. Any more thoughts?
That's everything I had.
I had a bunch of questions about the rooming or boarding house and the
Well, we're going to go
SRO.
through each
Are we
one of
gonna
these.
go through each one of
So
these?
unless you have any
Okay.
other comments?
No.
Or George? No. Okay, so
No,
then
just-
let's
just
start
the
with
list.
number 1.
You okay, Kevin? You just lost feeling. You just lost feeling from the neck down.
I knew I was in trouble when I walked in and I wore a hat. I'm like,
So
Expedition.
this list, you've all seen, you know, both the Planning Commission and the DRB have seen some version of this list. This was items that Rod, Brian, and I kind of have pulled up primarily from working with it, either doing staff review or Brian reviewing applications or working with the DRB.
And
So
we should say that, you know, the Planning Commission has not reviewed these comments, so these are really draft comments for discussion purposes, and no final decision has been made.
So the first issue was allowing rooming or boarding houses as a conditional use in the residential neighborhood. So rooming and boarding houses are a current use in this, in the regulations. And they're basically, you know, houses where rooms are rented out of them. They are, in the residential neighborhood, there are more, what we think are more intense residential uses, like specialized sorry. If you want to jump in.
Do you want me to jump in?
There are some other
Well,
other specialized residential structures. So under that, I think you can get dorms, you can get shelters. So some more, what we think are more intense residential uses. So we thought adding the rooming or boarding houses as a conditional use, you know, might be an option. So, I mean, thoughts on that?
do you want to guide to which part?
And if you have your land use regulations, it's on page 2-32 is the residential neighborhood use table. There have been some requests of, you know, people with a single family home that, you know, have some different, you know, they rent out rooms maybe to friends. They're kind of co-housing type thing. So this use, the rooming or the boarding house, could just make permitting it a little bit easier.
And it's an important thing to permit. It's an important use in the town.
Yeah.
I don't think there's too many.
I don't think it's huge, but I think it's significant, and it's a way of offsetting the operating costs, the maintenance costs of older homes, and it provides a format for housing for some single occupant households that is important to preserve. The one thing I'd have concern about, which is a sort of a sidebar issue, is the Airbnb kind of angle to this. That you could have people redeveloping existing family homes into short-term accommodation, you know, using the boarding house as a definition, but basically operating it as an Airbnb.
You want to put a 30-day
What's that?
30-day minimum stay?
Well, we don't regulate Airbnb now.
I think under the definition of boarding house in the regulations now, there's a 30-day
Yeah.
minimum stay.
Yeah.
What about parking was the question I had.
Yeah.
I thought it just says in the back of the house, but it doesn't. Does it say that?
So there is a minimum parking ratio of a half parking space per bed for a congregate use, so we would consider it a congregate use, so 6 bedrooms would require 3 parking spaces.
Couldn't you do the Airbnb thing by calling it a B&B? Like an actual B&B in the zone anyway?
defined separately.
Isn't that one of the uses?
The bed and breakfast, I think, has time limitations.
Yes.
Well, no, it says short term. Let's see, let's go to that.
It's in the definition in the back. Yeah.
There's some special standards, though. Bed and breakfast, you have to be serving breakfast. You, only 6 rooms, and guests can't stay for more than 14 days. So Airbnb has all different types of arrangements.
Right.
Well, I'm thinking maybe we should ask Maya which comment she had on these things so that we don't get bogged down.
Well, I assume that the boarding house definition of the bedroom would be the one that's in the book, 80 square feet, right? Bedroom, it's on 15,
Yes.
15. And would there be a limit to the number of rooms that could
think
be
it's 6.
rented for
It's 6.
boarding?
6. There's a limit of 6 rooms.
Yep.
So I have the same concern about parking.
Okay.
Even though you only have to have 3 parking spaces, we have some big houses in my neighborhood that I'm sure have, people could rent 4 bedrooms. And I don't know where people would park in the winter.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I would like to see it limited to the amount of parking or something. I don't know, the number of rooms you could rent correlated in some way to the available off-street.
Would that be,
Parking?
that would be addressed under the conditional use standards, parking would be. So if it was a conditional use, that, well, it would be under, yeah.
So you'd have to prefer.
Would have to go to the development review board.
Right.
And it's also, I think it was required that the owner live in the house for it to qualify as a boarding house. So there aren't many 7 and up, bedroom homes. So I think the biggest you would have would be a 7-bedroom home with 6 rented boarding rooms and a minimum of 3 parking spaces, right?
Right.
Aren't most of these uses downtown?
It's really not that uncommon in residential neighborhoods.
Right.
Yeah, there's, I can think of
I
one.
would say the area between the high school and South Main Street, on that side of Canal Street, you could get quite a few fitting into this category. And then less so on the other side of Canal Street, but still some.
So, well, parking is definitely a concern, I guess, as the planning commission moves forward, so.
Yeah,
Okay, so
the
we'll
only
fo-
other thing I thought of, just to make one more comment, is I don't know where this goes, is subletting. I know people who have rented apartments and then sublet 1 or more of their bedrooms. I don't know where that falls, but then it also maybe gets to her parking question.
It's kind of under this. I mean, it's
Yeah.
what we've kind of come up with. So somebody, well, is that person that's subletting? So like are they renting or own the home and then they're subletting out?
So
other
the
rooms?
situations I've known of have been a tenant rents say a 3-bedroom
Yeah.
apartment from a non-resident landlord even, and then they sub-rent 1 or 2 of the bedrooms to friends.
Yeah, that we don't really get.
I don't even know if that falls
We
under
don't
this
get
or
into
not.
that, actually. Yeah, I mean.
More if you're an owner,
right.
like if you're an owner and then you're subletting, you're renting out rooms, that turns into this
That turns
Yes.
into this.
situation.
But in that instance, if there was some kind of violation around parking or something else, we would take it up with the property owner, and that would drive down to the tenant and then the subtenants. But that's the way we would approach it, if there was an infraction of some kind.
So Maya, do you want to tell us what other comments this list spurred for you?
On the whole list?
Yes. Because the planning commission is going to be discussing these at our next meeting, so we'd really like to hear from the DRB tonight.
Well, I had on number 5, I also had a question about the parking. And I suppose that increasing the footprint, our approval would depend upon how big the property was, right, James? I mean, it would be like that apartment on Black Mountain Road that guy wanted to build.
Well, Sue, maybe you'd like to just give a little background to this number 5.
Yeah, so on this one, I mean, we spent a lot of time at the Planning Commission coming up with the 4,000 square feet. We looked at footprints in the mixed-use district. And the Planning Commission settled on 4,000 square feet. As staff has worked with different people who've come in for housing projects, we've kind of realized that the 4,000 square feet is preserving the existing settlement pattern in the neighborhoods, but it's not really allowing for growth. And I think, as Rod put it nicely, it's not necessarily the most pro-smart growth policy, because we don't have it can be a barrier to larger multifamily, units. So
That the district might need and that we might want to be encouraging.
right, because it's on transportation routes and sidewalks
Yeah.
and well located towards other conveniences. So I know which one you're talking about. There was that small lot on Black Mountain Road with a very large, maybe 6 units in there, and it was a small parcel. I think allowing up to 6,000 square feet is dependent on the developer being able to meet the parking and the landscaping and the stormwater and the coverage. So just because we allow it to go to 6,000, I think it's helpful for the larger lots. It doesn't necessarily make if it's a small lot, they're probably not
You're
going to
still gonna
get
be
to
constrained.
6,000
Yeah.
and, still meet the other requirements of the regulations.
So it requires, or talks about the need to maintain the standards if you're going to expand them like this, and the other
Yes.
things need to be
The
in
other things
place.
still need to be complied with.
There's probably, just enough largish parcels or parcels where, and it's not an activity that we've seen too much of in Brattleboro, but that you would refer to in other jurisdictions as a scrape off. So you could get, a corner lot and a lot next to it that, when merged, could allow for a 6,000 square foot building to be built and landscaped and appropriate parking. And, you'd get a denser use that way. And if it was economically viable, you could have a developer buy both properties, scrape them, and then build a new one, which is much more of a metropolitan kind of thing to do, but it's pretty common. So.
Okay, so,
Yeah, actually. Before we move on here, we think it's important to make a distinction here between multifamily residential uses at about 6,000 square feet, and then what's an appropriate size for a commercial building. We don't think increasing the minimum size from 4,000 to 6,000 square feet for commercial buildings is a good idea in the mixed-use district. We think that a commercial use building of that size, of more than 4,000 square feet, gets to be pretty dominant in a mixed-use kind of setting. So we're really just calling out multifamily housing developments here.
great.
Maybe a true mixed-use building.
Or the remote possibility of a genuine mixed-use building with, retail on the first floor and offices and apartments on the second and third floors, some combination like that.
Any more comments from anyone on the DRB?
Yeah. Oh, on number 6, I don't think I understood it.
Oh, okay. Right now, in the institutional district, we don't have a provision for allowing parking structures and surface parking as a use on a lot. So imagine a single parcel, and that the only use you're going to use that parcel for is as a surface parking lot. It may or may not be owned by the institution or the organization that wants to take advantage of the parking spaces. So right now we don't provide for that. We, for the most part, treat parking as a site plan element that relates to the dominant use on the parcel. So we don't really spend too much time thinking about parking as a kind of a business and as a single use for a parcel. And the question that's posed here is not altogether clear the way we've posed it, but it's a question about the institutional district, which is made up of either large educational or healthcare campuses with high parking demand, and whether we should include parking structure and surface parking as a use specific to the institutional district or not. I'm inclined at this point to want to say that we should continue to treat parking as a site plan element for review in the institutional district and not allow for parking structures and surface parking as separate uses, because it would open up the possibility of a commercial parking lot or a commercial parking structure that was operated just because it was next to or adjacent to a hospital or a school or some such thing. And I think that's not what we're intending to have happen.
And I think furthermore, we probably want to take a look at the use throughout the regulations, because a quick kind of look through, we saw some areas where like, ooh, maybe it shouldn't be there, or so,
right,
because it's contrary to the goals of the district. So
right. So we want to sort of pull this one back a little bit and do a bit more research here. We think that parking should be regarded as a site plan element that's, accessory to the use of the structure or structures on the site. So we just need to make sure that the language matches up in each instance.
Yeah.
And the last part about that is that in the institutional district, for the most part, every large campus has an Act 250 permit, and there's controlling language in those Act 250 permits with regard to vehicle trips per day calculated for the use of the site and parking provision on site. So it's there are other layers of review here that are in play as well.
I'm thinking about the hospital.
That's what I'm thinking about.
Any other specific comments? Or perhaps, James, you'd like to tell us overall how the new regulations have been working for you?
The only time I can think that they've not worked well has to do with when the DRB is not empowered to grant a dimensional waiver. And I mean, that's a policy call. And I can think of a couple examples. The easiest one to remember being the application the museum had for the old power plant down on Arch Street, where the statute for us to grant a what's the word? Variance has a standard that is sort of insanely high. I can imagine how a parcel could conceivably qualify, but it would sort of require, like, how they say it takes 9 things going wrong in a row to crash an airplane. I think that's
Yeah.
what it would take to get a variance.
I think that's more a problem with state law than our development review regulations.
That's true. What I mean is that the state law theoretically allows a DRB to grant dimensional waivers, not variance but waiver, based on different criteria, but we don't have that power. And sometimes I wish we did. Sometimes it might be a good thing that we don't. It's, I don't know, it's kind of like, if you give the executive a lot of power, you might have to deal with Richard Nixon. It's not just this board, but the next board and the next board after that and the next board after that that's going to have a more significant ability to to take the standards in the zoning bylaws and just be like, we're gonna grant a waiver because we feel like this is good for business or good for the town, or you like the applicant's style or whatever.
Well, we'll see the second coming of Richard Nixon next week.
But it also, I mean, the flip side of things is sometimes you get an application where it's close to, but not conforming with whatever. And it is frustrating to know that even if it seems like a good idea, we're really, we would have to just ignore the law, basically. So that would be my only comment. I think they work well. We haven't really had a test of the, what was the word we used for clumps in the rural, residential, and rural?
Oh,
Clustering?
clusters.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
haven't.
any rural subdivision.
I've been hoping that we would get some kind
Yeah.
of interesting rural project that would test the applicability of those.
Conservation
Right,
subdivision.
conservation
Concepts.
subdivision. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had one,
No,
No.
right?
nope.
Pretty typical.
And to be honest, the applications we've had, with very few exceptions, have been very conventional for the last year. And if you stuck a gun against my head and said, okay, how is this different under the new bylaws and the old bylaws, like pick an application that was really different, I'd be hard pressed to answer that. Maybe you could think of one. Brian, see, I wasn't very conversant in the old bylaws anyway, because I
think we spent a lot of time trying to put in like innovations and flexibility, and if no one avails themselves of it, there's not, we can't make them.
there's not a lot of development pressure, There aren't people with money who are saying, oh, let's make this innovative so it conforms with the bylaws and we're going to have a bunch of people buy these houses. I mean, the only thing I can think of is the senior housing project. And I don't even remember if it's these bylaws or the old bylaws.
I think it was the
It was the
old.
old
It was
one.
the old.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thought
but
so.
it would work under the new ones as well.
Right.
Do you feel the quality of the applications are better? Like what your...
Documentation.
We've had good applications. See, one of the funny things is development is so slow. How long have I been on the DRB? 5 years? Maybe? There's like a couple of guys that have had sort of repeat issues that own a few properties in town, and they don't want to pay an engineer, they don't want to pay a lawyer, and they're not stupid, so they're just like, whatever. I'm going to do the application. I'm going to do basically what's necessary to make it conform to what they're asking us to do. And they do it, and on the DRB, we kind of grumble about it, and ultimately, we try to make a good decision.
I think we've had better drawings under the new regs.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
We don't have any more hand-drawn pencil
Napkins.
things that, or I haven't
Yeah, we've
seen
had a
any.
couple of them.
Yeah, but not under the new regs.
I mean, I was so
What happened? I
clueless
can't
when we were into the old
remember.
regs, and Craig Miskovich was the chair, and he was so well-versed in them that he kind of did a lot of work for the rest of the board. And, he'd be like, well, yeah, this conforms with the bylaws, and everybody else on the board was like, oh, okay, great, this really sounds good. Hi. And ever since, when Craig left, we kind of had to stand on our own 2 feet, but that was almost exactly when the new zoning bylaws took effect.
Right.
So it's really hard to compare them for us to the old ones. I think Brian is your guy to do that.
Yeah, and I think what's really changed is the applications are consistently good.
Well, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
They hit the standard consistently. Before, they were very uneven, and some people could come in with a napkin drawing.
Oh, we've had some that were terrible.
We
Well, I
did
think
a
it's
couple of napkin-like
I think
drawings.
it's about 100 feet,
Right.
Did you measure?
That just
No?
makes your work so much harder. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you get an applicant where it's like it's their house and they've never done this before, and they grab some graph paper and they probably don't have the money to hire an engineer or lawyer either. So it's like, well,
Right.
not much you can do there.
Is there anything more we want to discuss with the DRB?
I think we're okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Could I just, I'm sorry, but could I just ask for maybe a 30-second, 1-minute summary about the dimensional standards thing you said at the beginning relating to the Arch Street thing? I don't
I'm
know.
embarrassed at my lack of memory, but, and the Arch Street had a couple of problems because it was in the flood,
Yes.
Way.
not the flood, it was in the floodway.
It was in the
It's in the
floodway.
floodway, yeah.
God, you'd think
And it was
that's
actually a
8 years.
use issue.
Yes, that was not, yes.
Oh, yeah,
That was a
okay.
use variance.
And there are
That's
no
it.
use variances under Vermont law.
Right, and that's the
Okay.
catch.
What? I know that there have been applications where
I
it's
could-
been close on dimensions.
I can think of
Can't remember what they were.
a couple, like
Yes.
O'Reilly Auto, right? They had issues with the building height, but there was no waiver for that, maybe?
There was.
That's an
That's
example.
right.
yeah.
I don't think any of us were super emotional about that example, but O'Reilly Auto was a competitor to Advance Auto, and it was, you know, a box with something that was designed in California to make it look attractive from the road. The issue was it not tall enough? Was it too tall?
It was not
It was not tall enough.
It was not tall enough,
Right.
and you know, it was on the old Friendly's parcel on Putney Road, and I think everybody on the board was kind of like, well, you know, this ugly building is probably acceptable based on the standards for Putney Road, and the fact that it's like 3 feet less than the standards are not going to significantly change that fact. And it just seems sort of arbitrary, and I think that would have been one where we would have liked to at least have the option of banding whether that's a good idea.
That is when I'm actually looking at this. So the building height, the waiver that you can get is to go up, not to come under
Right.
what
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
what
Right.
it is.
And I would still probably argue not to go down in that instance. And so what we're really attempting to do is avoid the construction of a rectilinear box that's just tall enough, you know, to fit their stuff in.
I understand why we don't have it. It's just, there are moments when it's frustrating when it's close particularly.
I don't understand why they didn't design some sort of a parapet just to meet the,
Well, in fact, we've found, I think Brian did
It's
some
soil.
research in Florida and found that when they've been asked to provide something in the front of the building to get a certain facade height, they're capable of doing it. So, you know,
so they chose not to.
So it probably wasn't a deal breaker in terms of.
no, very rarely a deal breaker.
There was a lot of, that was a weird hearing with
They
discussion
argued-
of soil and wind as
Yes.
it relates to
They
building
had-
height.
they
and
had-
it was kind of like,
They had soil compression data to do with the fact that they would have to reinforce the foundation to support this taller wall. And then they had some fairly hypothetical arguments about wind speed and direction that may also require extra engineering for them to go up
They tried.
an extra 6 feet.
I mean, the soil thing seemed legit. The wind thing,
Yeah,
I don't.
we were
I
kinda
think
like-
everybody on the board was scratching their heads a little
Yeah.
bit about that one.
We were like, wow,
Have some
that's
fun
good.
with it.
We didn't find it very compelling, but it's okay.
Can I give one little last
Please.
persuasive word on my sign idea?
Sure.
There's a side effect of this constraint, which is that, and this O'Reilly proposal is a good example. The big companies that have stores on Putney Road have like really professional graphics design firms who take, say, a 4x5 little cube and they can design something that's really eye-catching. And our local businesses, which we all love and support, I think oftentimes they're able to do far less with that little space. And it could be a nice advantage if they had some way to have that creative leeway, because the other thing is with these franchises or big box stores or whatever, you know, these big chains, basically they have the same logo and they have corporate branding that they're supposed to stay in. And like the New England Center of Circus Arts is a good example where they did it anyway. But I don't know, if it was like this special thing and people with businesses were more aware of it, maybe they would be motivated to ask their artist cousin who's like living off nothing if they could do something pretty cool for $3,500 and end up having a really unique sign that would set them apart and be consistent with our Brattleboro ethos of art and commerce.
So we've identified a potential needed profession in Brattleboro.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's still a very challenging idea, but I think there are some positives there that are worth thinking about. You know, kind of like those Dutch towns with all the different colored houses. You know, if you were
You
able
should go to
make it work, it would
Nashville.
be cool.
The neon signs there are beautiful.
Right. I love
Yeah.
neon signs. I love
Yeah.
spinning signs, you know, moving signs. I feel bad that those are this lost.
We could make it a requirement, I guess.
I think there's a graveyard in Las Vegas.
Yeah, we should go.
Yeah, I've been there. It's really
Yeah.
cool.
Oh.
I knew you would have.
I like it. And the other thing is, there's a bunch of ghost signs in Brattleboro, like on the side of the Snell building across from the parking garage,
Yep.
where you can make out like the dimmest outline of these old signs. And I
Yes.
think actually when I was a kid, the little liver pill sign was one of those, and I don't know how they were able to paint it. Do you know? This must have been 25 years ago.
Yeah. I'm assuming that that is actually regarded as part of the
Like a
historic
mural.
fabric of the structure, and it's a
Yeah.
mural. Because the company doesn't exist anymore.
Right. I don't know.
Liver pills.
I think it would be cool if people were allowed to bring those back just for the heck of it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's my piece.
Okay, well,
Do
great.
people know the sign that we're talking about?
The Liverpool sign?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but would it
Yeah, I
be
just
worth,
wanted to make a comment.
I think we took it as to think more about and have staff look into more. I mean, would it be worth drawing a distinction, having staff look at, is there a distinction that could be drawn somewhere around age of the sign? So a lot of the examples you've been giving are.
Or like
All my
historic
examples are-
preservation.
Yeah.
All my examples are old signs, but I think it would also be cool if you could have like a new modern looking sign if it was the appropriate
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Or again, guidance to sign development.
I mean, I don't like the
Or
idea that there's no better
incentivize
design
or-
out there that hasn't been done before. I don't know if it's gonna be art, that should be in there too.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's a way to like engage our local design firms. You know, like do they know that this is kind of a need in the town, and is there a way to refer people to? I don't know.
I think if the exception existed and you communicated it to them, they might push it with their clients. But it's one of those things like the chicken and the egg, you know?
Okay, well, great.
And I mean, if you change the law and no one does it, then you're right back where we started with these ugly rectangular signs on Putney Road that are like, you know, yellow type on a black face.
Right.
We can,
Boy, that sounds awful.
you know, play with the
Yes, George.
I just have a comment that's kind of personal to me, and it has to do with stormwater runoff. And it looks like there are a couple spots here where that's being considered.
Right.
And in one of them, at least, it talked about a large or major change. I think we should take every opportunity we can to control the stormwater runoff.
Well, we're in agreement because I think the purpose of some of these items is to capture the control of stormwater in a project that may not allow for review as it stands now.
I guess I'm saying I don't feel like it has to be major. And I'm not sure how you define
You
major
mean major
either.
site plan review?
So anytime somebody, you know, comes in for a permit, we should, you know, if they're on their property, we should be pushing trying to get stormwater compliance, or at least some steps in that direction.
Yes.
So at this point, we have to do stormwater if people increase the impervious surface on their property by 500 square feet. So small additions and that type of thing, they do need to do at least some lower pack design, stormwater treatment.
500 square feet is really small when you start thinking about commercial sites. So it's a couple of parking spaces, or, you know, it's not a very large area.
It's small, but a lot of these sites
Are
are
already
fully impervious.
Totally impervious.
So they don't, it doesn't,
Right.
you know, they get away with that.
Right. That's kind
They
of
fall
our
through the
issue.
loophole.
That, particularly in commercial districts, Putney Road again comes to mind. You can have an application where they're doing a major reconstruction on the site, but because between the building and the parking area it already is above 97% impervious, they
Yeah.
don't.
But, you know, if they ever
Yeah.
do anything with that parking lot,
Yeah.
we should be able to
Yep.
go back in.
Yes. Yes, that's what we're saying.
Yes.
That's number 12, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Yes, that's the issue that we've got
And
now.
also number 3.
Yes, 12 is
Yeah, I mean,
free.
you're actually going to see one next week.
Next week.
That's coming in. McDonald's is building a new building, but they're not increasing impervious, so they actually don't need to come into compliance with the stormwater regulations. So it's a missed opportunity for us, and there's lots of big and little sites that
Well, even the police station.
Oh, no, we
they're
got them.
making.
I didn't think so. I thought we couldn't
They're
deal with the runoff there.
They are.
We made them put in a rain garden.
We are
But that pipe that we don't know where that
that's
was
true.
running
That's
out
me.
the back, weren't able to deal with that.
That's right.
Right.
They did submit a plan with no net increase, or
Yes, they
decrease,
did.
actually.
A slight increase, I think.
The outflow decreased.
The outflow's decreased, exactly. And so it's a retrofit of a new stormwater treatment system and ensuring that the flow to the swale on the edge of 91 will meet state requirements. So in fact, the resurfacing of the parking lot at the police facility is necessitated by them having to dig up underneath the parking lot and install new stormwater treatment. So it will be an improvement over the existing conditions, not necessarily a reduction in impervious area though. So the treatment will be improved.
As long as they deal with it on site. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one I had a question about, I wasn't sure what it was about. I think it was number 11, non-residential FAR
Oh,
in residential.
that's the floor area ratio. So if you have a, if you have a non-residential use in the residential neighborhood, the kind of ratio of the building to the lot
Yep.
is intended to be very small, so it's a 0.2 ratio. And so the concern is that that might be too small. But I think our response to that is, we really wanted to preserve the residential character of a neighborhood. So if there is, and there's only a handful of non-residential uses or kind of commercial uses that you could have there, but we didn't want it to be too big.
So you're not proposing to change, or?
I think right now we're leaning towards we wouldn't change it.
Right.
Okay.
I think there are some existing non-residential uses in residential neighborhoods that's a barrier to, but they can continue to be. It might be difficult for them to expand.
So, thanks to the DRB. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all your thoughtful comments. And I think it's great that we can communicate. We write the regs and you enforce them. So we really need to keep the communication lines open.
Thank you for the chocolates. Do
Thank
you guys
you.
have those every meeting now?
No, Kate.
Good tradition.
We're gonna take all our recruits.
Curses then.
Yes.
Okay, so I'd love a motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Get that.
Thank you.